3 years ago, on Father's Day, I preached about 5 things that I learned from my dad. Well, today I'm going to preach about 5 things I learned from my mother on this Mother's Day. Not that I learned only 5 things from either parent, but I don't have time to talk about 100 things that I learned from my mom. I know you all want to get to lunch at some point. So we're going to narrow it down to 5 of the more important things that I learned from my mother. My mom, whose name is Sharon, is going to be turning 80 years of age this November, and so I thought this might be a good year to do that. And I want to share with you from Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 through 7. And as I read through these scriptures, this is how my parents taught, and this is how most parents teach. They don't sit you down on the couch with a chalkboard and a textbook and teach you about life. They teach you about life as you go along, don't they? And this is what the scripture talks about. So if we could get that up on the screen, Deuteronomy 6, beginning at verse 4, it says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. And these words which I command you today shall be in your heart." And then notice how he says this. "You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up." In other words, as you're living life, teach these truths to your children. This one particular man was talking about things that he had learned from his mom in a more humorous way. And he said, for example, that my mother taught me about time travel. When she would say, "If you don't straighten up, young man, I'm going to knock you into next week." And then he said she taught me about logic. "Because I said so, that's why." And then more logic when she said, "If you fall off that swing and break your leg, don't you come running to me." And then he said she taught me about cleanliness when she said to my brother and me, "If you two are going to kill each other, do it outside because I just cleaned the whole house." And then she taught me about irony when she said, "If you don't stop crying, I'm going to give you something to cry about." Yeah. And then she taught me about anticipation, he said, because she said to me on the phone one time, "You just wait until your father and I get home." And then one more, he said she taught me about justice, because she said, "One of these days, you're going to have children of your own, and I hope they turn out just like you." Oh, the things we learn from our moms, huh? It's never ending. When years ago, a newspaper in London had printed in their daily newspaper the teachers that Winston Churchill had as he was growing up. And after reading that, he wrote a letter to the editor, Winston Churchill did, and he said, "In your list, you left out the greatest teacher that I ever had, and that was my mother." And I think we can relate to that. With all due respect to our school teachers, and they all certainly do deserve our accolades. In fact, I think this past week was Teacher Appreciation Week, and we praise and applaud all of you who are teachers in our schools and at home. But certainly there's certain method that mothers have that teach us every day the wonderful lessons that we have to learn. And so I want to share with you some of the things that I learned from my mother as I was growing up. And I want to tell you a little bit about her. First of all, she was born on November the 16th, 1939. So in 6 months and 4 days, she'll be having her 80th birthday. And she lived her whole life, or has lived her whole life in West Virginia. And she was the third of 4 children. And she was born as a Wolf. Sharon Wolf was her original name. In fact, a little side note, her sister was named Carolyn Wolf, and she married a guy named Lamb. And so she went from a wolf to a lamb. And so she really was a wolf in sheep's clothing. She really was. Sometimes I wish I had the last name of Lamb. But, that's the way it goes. My mother, when she was 22, she married my dad, Bob, who was almost 17 years her senior. My dad was almost 39 years old, and so he was heading toward 40, and my mother was barely in her 20s when they got married. But it was never an issue. I mean, my mom and dad got along wonderfully. In fact, I was talking to Lynn Jackson about it this week, and I said I never heard them argue. I don't know, maybe they went to some tornado shelter and argued, I don't know, where no one could hear them, but I never heard them have a cross word at one another. Pretty remarkable, but they got along wonderfully until my dad passed away in 2000. He was 78 years old. And they just had a wonderful marriage up until that point. And still today, of course, as I reflect back, I think about all the things my dad taught me and all the things that my mother taught me. And for 15 years, my mother worked at Highland Farm, kind of like a Walgreens type place, only a little bit bigger. And it was right across the street from where we lived, which was pretty cool because I could go over there, and I was 9, 10 years old. And if I wanted a candy bar, I'd just tell the lady on my way out, just put this on the mom's tab, And I never took advantage of that, by the way. But I felt pretty cool. I wasn't cool, but I felt cool, And, but she worked back in the pharmacy department where she was the cashier. She wasn't the pharmacist, but she was the cashier. So she was on her feet all day long. I'll talk about that here in just a little bit more. But some of the things that my mom did, I want to show you a few pictures to I don't have that many pictures of my mother. Most of them are in photo albums back home. But here's a picture of my family. And you can tell my dad's a little bit older than my mother. Of course, he had that great crew cut that was famous in the late 60s and early 70s. And I think that picture was probably taken about 1970 or 71, something like that. And my mom's not smiling in that picture, but don't let that fool you. She was always a smiling person, fun to be around, very social, and laughed a lot. And that's my sister Debbie on the left, and my sister Barb on the right. And that funny-looking guy in the middle, yours truly. And my mother, I like to do certain things that she was really, really good at, and I don't have pictures of her, but I have some pictures of me that will kind of illustrate that, because you know what a narcissist I am, So here's a picture of me with holding a cake. My mom loved to cook. I didn't have any pictures of meatloaf or turkey, so I got a cake. And so that was me. I think that's on my 4th birthday. I think there's 4 candles there. And I wanted to put that one picture in there just so you could know for at least one day in my life I was cute in that previous picture. Now that guy in that picture is not my dad. He's a friend of the family. But that picture cracks me up because of the look on my face. They got me bowling pins, for my birthday or whatever. And it's like I was just mesmerized from day one. It's like bowling pins. And so this next picture is me bowling in the kitchen of our house. I set up the bowling pins on the other end of the kitchen, And I got miles and miles of use out of those bowling pins. And so that was, of course, still one of my favorite activities. So my mom and dad were both bowlers. In fact, all 5 of us in our family bowled. My 2 sisters bowled too. And so we just had a bowling family. That's just what I came from. And then one more picture. I assume this is on Easter Sunday, with the bow tie and everything. Hey, that's where Luke gets it, maybe. I don't know. Our son Luke loves bow ties. But getting ready for church one Sunday morning. All right, let me talk about 5 things now. Now you got to get a little bit of an idea of where I came from. First one, number 1, my mother taught me that tenderness and affection go a long way in helping a child feel loved. When I think about my mom, one of the first things I think about is that she was someone that you could be close to because she was a very welcoming person. She was a very gracious person. She was very generous in hugs and words of encouragement and affection. And that meant a great deal to me growing up. I never questioned when I was growing up whether or not I was loved by my parents, because my mom and dad both were very easy to be close with, And that was something that I valued greatly. My mom was very kind and gracious to be around. Not like this one woman. Look at this picture. That was not what my mother was like. I saw that picture and I thought, okay, that's just the antithesis of my mom. That's just the opposite of my mom. But I just had to put that up there for you to see. Don't do that to your kids. Okay, you get that picture off there now, but I just thought that was funny. But I was reading recently where one psychologist or whatever identified 4 different types of parenting. I'm sure there are probably more than that, but they put them into 4 categories. They said there's the authoritarian, which is like, the drill sergeant, military type person, where there's very little emphasis on relationship, and it's just rules. You're going to do this or else. If you ever saw the movie The Great Santini, I saw that in the 70s, I think. And it kind of like that, a real drill instructor kind of person with very little compassion and relationship emphasis. That's the authoritarian. Children like this often grow up not very close to their parents, often a distance between them, often a lot of resentment in their lives. The second one they mentioned was the authoritative. Now this is a good thing. This is what I would say my mom and dad were, authoritative, where there is the authority, but there's also an emphasis on relationship. There's also an emphasis on closeness and connecting emotionally. So yes, there were the rules. Yes, there were, you get in trouble if you do this, and you can even get spanked, I know it's not a good word that people use today, but yeah, you get in trouble. But there's also a built-in connection with relationship, authoritative parents. And then the other 2 aren't too hot. The other ones were permissive, where the parents just let their kids do anything and everything, and they never discipline them. They just let them run wild, and their kids never get in trouble. And then the other one is the uninvolved parent, where they're just disconnected, where there's no involvement and very little interest in their kids, very little attention paid to them, and they're just kind of off in their own little world and not involved in their kids' lives at all. Kids that grow up with permissive parents or uninvolved parents often grow up to get into trouble. They have a lot of behavioral issues because there's no discipline in their lives and no authority in their lives at all, and they can just pretty much run wild. I'm very thankful as I look back that I had authoritative parents that built their connection on relationships, but also had rules that we were expected to abide by. And so it's very important as you raise your kids to keep these things in mind. A lot of times I hear of grown-ups talk about how when they were growing up, they never heard their mom or dad tell them that they love them and never felt a real close connection with their parents. And it always breaks my heart because to me that's so foreign. I mean, to me, just growing up with that type of relationship with my parents, I always felt loved, always felt close to them. And my mom was really the person that taught me that. Tenderness and affection go a long way in helping your child feel loved. I mean, yeah, have the discipline, have the rules in place, because you have to teach them right from wrong, and they have to know there's consequences when you disobey. But don't forget the relationship and how very important that is. Okay, number 2. We all know this, right? A loving mother makes great sacrifices for her children. I'm sure we could have many testimonies about this today, because all of you mothers, because I know you're all loving mothers, and you make great sacrifices for your kids. One of the ones I think about with my mom, I mentioned that she worked at the pharmacy 40 hours a week, and she was on her feet all the time. And I found out later she had a lot of issues with her feet, a lot of problems with her feet. But she was always putting that on the back burner for us kids. She'd always make sure we had our clothes we needed for school and the stuff we needed. And I didn't know this at the time, but she would make sure that I had my baseball cleats. But she wouldn't concern herself with having the proper shoes that she needed for her feet. And she was often uncomfortable and a lot of problems with her feet. But she would make sure that me and my sisters, always had what we needed. And, that's just the kind of person that she is. And again, if you're a mother, I'm sure that you know that, how it is if you're like, might be a different issue, but it's like your kids come first. And that's something, that we who are not mothers probably don't thank you enough for. But, it's a beautiful thing to see. There's probably nothing more giving and more sacrificial than a mother's love that she has for her kids. It reminded me of a story, I thought about this just this morning, about this one mother. She was getting ready to go up the stairs, and she had already had her son's clothes washed and folded. They were in a basket at the bottom of the stairs. And she thought, well, I'm going upstairs. I'll take them up to him, save him a trip, whatever. So she carries her son's folded clothes in the basket up to the stairs, and she goes into his bedroom and sets them down. And he happened to be in there. And when he saw her put the clothes on the floor, he says, "Oh, thank you, Mom. I owe you one." And she turned around and she came back and she goes, "One? I owe you one." Yeah, he owed her like 1,000, He's like, "Oh, I owe you one." But, we just don't realize all the sacrifices that our mothers make for us. So that's the second one. Number 3, my mother taught me that to have a house of hospitality. We used to joke that our house was like Grand Central Station. How many of you all had houses like that when you were growing? Anybody? All right, Paul did. Okay. Okay, Mindy, yeah. Some of you. Because there were just people always coming in and out of our house. Our doors were never locked, except, I suppose, at nighttime. But there were just always, either my friends were there, or my sister's friends were there, or family members that lived in the area were there. And if I was coming home from baseball practice or something, I never knew who might be in our house. You know, like some of our family cousins or whatever, or my sister's friends or whatever. And that's why we used to always joke that it was like, Grand Central Station at our house. I moved away in 1985, went off to college here in Oklahoma, and we'd make trips back every once in a while. We were visiting one time a few years ago, and there was this guy at the house. He was like 20 years old. And I asked my mom, who is that guy? Didn't know him. And she said, oh, he's a friend of my nephew's. My nephew was living with my mom at the time. And he's just staying here for a little while until he gets back on his feet. He didn't have a job, and he didn't have a place to stay. And so my mom just said he can stay here for a while. And, so he was sleeping there, eating their food, until he got back on his feet. And that's just kind of how my mom was. If there was somebody that needed a place to stay, she'd let him stay. And it was just a place of hospitality. As I've thought about that, as we raised our kids, and of course Cindy had this idea as our kids were growing up too, so we were really on the same page with this. As our kids were growing up, we wanted to make our house, as best we could, kind of the hub for our kids, so that their friends would want to come play at our house, because then we knew what they were up to, for the most part, at least for the most part. Because, when you go off to other kids' houses, you never know what their houses are like, or what kind of influence. And our kids did go to their houses, too. We didn't say, hey, you can't go. They went often to their friends' homes. But I told you last week about the ping pong table we bought. We also had a foosball table in our basement and some other toys and games, so that their friends were encouraged, to come to our house, because it was like the cool house, And that was really a neat thing, because at least then, we kind of had a general idea of what they were up to. And so it's a neat thing to have a place of hospitality as your house. So whether it's for that or just for people there. My mom and dad, especially my mom, taught me that, to have a house of hospitality. Okay, number 4. These last two are really big to me, that I think are very important. My mom taught me that life is not about keeping up with the Joneses. The reason I say this is a big one to me, because I'm very thankful that my parents really had priorities straight when it came to stuff. Money's never been a big thing to me in terms of like having to be rich or having to have a particular standard of living or have a lot of stuff, or the fanciest car or the biggest house or anything like that. And I think a lot of that came from the way that I was raised. My mom and dad lived paycheck to paycheck. They never owned their own home. The cars we drove were clunkers. I'm telling you, we'd spend $500 or $1,000 for a car. And, you never knew what was going to be wrong with it. I remember one car we had, you had to keep the accelerator going when you were at the red light. So you had to put on the brake and then keep the accelerator going or else the car would stall, And there was just all kinds of stuff, And so we just didn't have the best of stuff. And we weren't in poverty or anything. But like I said, they lived paycheck to paycheck, and it was never an issue. It was just never a thing. My mom and dad never lamented the fact that they never had a house of their own, or that they didn't have a big house, or they didn't have a fancy car, or the nicest of clothes, or whatever. To them, it was just never was an issue. And I think they kind of taught me that those things weren't the most important things. Again, it wasn't like they set me down and said this to me. It was just something that I picked up on, that those things weren't where life is at. And I see so many people in life chasing riches, They're going after stuff, and they're never satisfied until they get more and more and more. And yet those aren't the things that bring satisfaction and happiness to a person's life. I'm very thankful that for my mom and dad, that relationships were what was important. I mean, I would rather have very little in terms of material possession and strong relationships and be taught how to love people and care about people than to have all the money in the world and all the fanciest clothes and nicest cars, but in the process, not treat people very well or not have strong relationships in my life. And to my mom and to my dad, relationships were far more important than having the nicest clothes or living in the nicest neighborhood or anything like that. Because greed will kill a person. It really will. I heard about this one California lawyer who was in Wyoming, and he went hunting and he killed this duck. And the duck, when it came fluttering down, fell on the other side of the fence on the property of this farmer. And so the lawyer starts to climb the fence to go get the duck. And this Wyoming farmer comes out on his tractor, just an old codger, elderly man. And he comes out there and he sees that lawyer climbing his fence and says, "What are you doing?" And the lawyer says, "Well, I killed that duck and I'm going to go get it." And that farmer says, "Well, this is my property." He said, "That duck's on my property. You can't have it." And that lawyer says, "I want you to know, sir, that I am one of the most successful lawyers in the entire United States. And if you don't let me have that duck, I will sue you for everything you've got." That old codger says to that lawyer, he said, "Well, you're just not familiar with the way we handle things here in Wyoming, are you? We settle little disputes like this with the Wyoming 3-kick rule." And this lawyer says, "The Wyoming 3-kick rule? What in the world is that?" And this old coot says, "Well, what happens is I kick you 3 times. And then you kick me 3 times. And it keeps going back and forth until one of you gives up and loses." Well, that California lawyer, he sizes up that old man and he thinks to himself, "Man, I got to take this guy no problem, So the old guy gets down off his tractor and he rears back with those hard work boots and he kicks that California lawyer right in the shin. And that lawyer just drops to his knees, Well, then the old man goes back and he kicks the lawyer right in the face, about rips off his nose. And he's lying flat on the ground. And then that lawyer, that farmer has one more kick, so he rears back and he kicks him with those hard boots right in the kidneys, And the farmer sees this guy lying there, and the lawyer's thinking, he's about to give up, and he thinks, "Well, if I can just get back to my feet, So he gets back on his feet. And he says to the farmer, he says, "All right, now it's my turn." And the farmer says, "Nah, that's all right, I give up, you can have the duck." I'm just saying, greed will kill you. And the second lesson of that story is be careful if you go to Wyoming. They're pretty sly. But greed will kill you, just saying. I'm thankful my parents taught me that relationships and people and love is far more important than stuff. Very important lesson to know. There are a lot of people out there who ain't got that right. You got to get your priorities right. Number 5. This is most important of all. My mom taught me that I need Jesus. I know this is the last on the list, but it's the most important of all. She taught me that I need Jesus. My dad didn't get saved until I was probably 12 or 13 years old. And he would go to church with us sometime when I was little, but not always. And it was my mom, when I was young, that took us to church. We went to Fellowship Baptist Church. Oh, Baptist Church. And I can remember sitting in Sunday school class. I can remember falling asleep in the sanctuary during Fred Brewer's sermons. I can still remember the preacher's name when I was just a little kid. And I had my mom to thank. She taught me that the Bible is God's Word. And, I never questioned that. She just taught us to respect the Scriptures. And that it was the Holy Bible. It was God's Word. And my mom taught me that as a child. And I've always treasured that. And so that's something that you just can't put a price tag on. In fact, for you who are parents, I want you to consider that this is the most important thing that you can teach your kids. I know you can teach them to tie their shoes, to brush their teeth, to wash their hair, to bathe themselves. You can teach them the ABCs and how to write their name. And as they get older, you can teach them how to drive a car and do their income taxes and all those things. But supposing you do all of that, but you never teach them about Jesus. You never teach them about salvation. And they die and go to hell forever. What have you done? Certainly you need to teach them those other things too, right? I didn't want our kids to grow up socially inept, so we taught them how to do those other things too. But don't leave the most important thing undone. Because this is the most important thing. To know Jesus and to go to heaven. So as you're thinking about your life as a parent, if you have kids that you're still raising, if you're involved in somebody's life, maybe as a grandparent, teach them about Jesus. Like the scriptures in Deuteronomy said, as you're walking by the way with them, as you're sitting down, as you're getting up, sit them about. You don't have to sit them on the couch and lecture them. Just teach them as you go. It's the best way to do it. That's the biblical way. So make that your number one priority. If I didn't teach them, some things, it might be all right. They can learn in some other way. But I wouldn't let anybody else, and neither was Cindy, take this responsibility because we felt that was ours to teach our kids about Jesus. And you do the same. Let's stand together as we pray.